Voter turnout can be notoriously low in communities throughout the Commonwealth and the nation, and the city of Springfield is no exception. So what can a municipality do to increase voter participation? Mailings and robocalls are one way. Carolee McGrath sat down to talk to Springfield City Councilor Jesse Lederman about the proposed ordinance to improve dismal voter turnout in the city.
Well, really what we started looking at in recent months, and it's something that's been talked about across the Commonwealth and across the United States, is the fact of turnout in municipal elections especially declining. In the city of Springfield, in our last municipal election, saw about 9.9% voter turnout. And what we wanted to take a look at was, why are some of the reasons that people might not be coming out to vote, and how can we at least start the conversation about how to improve those numbers? So we held a number of committee meetings, speaking with our election commissioner and also talking in the community with residents. And the number one question we heard that the election office often gets around local elections was, when is the election and where do I go to vote? The city of Springfield has over 40 polling locations, and so at least initially, to begin the conversation, put together an ordinance that would propose to send a neutral postcard from the Election Commission to each registered household, informing them that there is going to be a municipal election, which offices would be on the ballot in that election, where their polling location was, and also contact information for the Election Commission so they could get any technical questions that they might have answered.
And how much would that cost?
So the estimated cost from the Election Commission is about $13,000 per election. So if you had it would only happen in municipal elections. If you had a local election with a preliminary and a general election, you'd be looking at $26,000 a year. And the most of that, or not a year, but every 2 years for each election. And so most of that cost is actually the postage, about $11,000 in postage, and the rest would be simply the printing and addressing of the postcards.
Do you think that money is worth it? Because I think what you hear from people a lot of times in a local election is, it's just local. They don't need my vote. Do you think that that will really make a difference in motivating somebody to go out?
Well, I think it's a place to start. Certainly, again, looking at that number one question we get, when is the election, where do I go to vote? We're looking to solve that problem, but we're also looking to show that the city of Springfield is invested in ensuring that the voices of our people are heard in these elections. And certainly, we're going to spend many thousands of dollars to hold this election. So it made sense in our minds, at least, to make the commitment that we're going to tell people when that election is going to be carried out and hopefully spark more conversation in the community. But I think it's very important to note that that can only be a starting point. The ordinance also included some language around increased signage on Election Day, which many surrounding towns do, and something that we thought may just encourage folks to realize that it is Election Day. But since then, there's also been continued discussion, and the mayor has also put forward some ideas around doing more in our school curriculum to encourage young people when they get old enough to vote to come out, and also encourage their parents. We're certainly committed to working together with him to make that a reality. And also the idea of putting together a committee with robust media involvement to discuss even further how can we spread the word about local elections. Certainly myself, I do everything I can when I'm running and when I'm on the ballot, and also when other folks are on the ballot, to go out and knock on doors, talk with people, make phone calls, and engage the community. But I also think that we do have to start somewhere. And so telling people when the election is and where they can go vote, I think, is a good place to start.
How do you get people excited about it? Because always when there's a presidential election, people get pretty fired up, right? But when it's local, a lot of times, people are not as interested. How do you make the case that what happens locally matters?
I think that's a great point. And if we look at the numbers, too, there's something there. In our last state election, which took place, just a year after our local election, where we had that 9.9% voter turnout, we saw voter turnout go up to 34%. So these are people who obviously care about voting, and the question becomes, why did they come out for that election versus the local? Now, certainly, there can often be sort of more attention paid to those state elections. Certainly, we're coming up on a presidential primary and a presidential election in the near future. And you're right, there's a lot of excitement generated around those, but a lot of the decisions that get made at the local level are the ones that impact people immediately in their neighborhoods and communities. That's why I got involved in running for office. And so I think the more that we can be engaged with our community, communities, not just at election season, but in the interim. One of the things I've done since I was elected to the city council is work to hold town hall style meetings across our city's neighborhoods. And one of the things that's been very encouraging about that is that we've been able to see new faces coming out to those meetings and engaging with their elected officials. And our colleagues have been very supportive. We've had representatives of the mayor's office at those meetings, fellow councilors, state representatives, state senators, and school committee members. So I think we also have to show the public that we are public servants. The elected officials work for them, and they're not only going to be there at election time.
Right, and this is certainly not unique to Springfield, though, low voter turnout. I know in other communities, even in smaller towns, also struggle with the same sort of issue. What are you hearing from people, colleagues in other towns?
Absolutely. Again, if we look at the numbers, I know East Longmeadow just held their elections, and there were some headlines about the low turnout there as well. I think it goes back to getting people excited, but I also think that sharing information is very important. In researching this, we started looking at what are the steps that we can take, and as I mentioned, we hope that the notification ordinance would only be the first one. Many of the steps to address what some perceive as barriers to voting also need to be done in collaboration with the state. So, for example, the state has an early voting program that's been successful in state elections, but municipalities are not yet authorized to implement early voting. And so we hope, in the future to be able to have those conversations, bringing in our state legislators and saying, what can the Commonwealth do to empower local municipalities like the city of Springfield to encourage folks to come out? Some of my colleagues, took a trip to Denver, Colorado, and brought this up during our debate when they were researching the cannabis industry, but also happened to be there during an election, and they were able to see some of the steps that have been taken in that community where the Secretary of State has actually mailed ballots to voters. And so not necessarily that we are proposing that, but just saying that we can look beyond and take a look at what are some things we might be able to implement that go a little bit further than what we're talking about.
People might be
now.
concerned about that in particular, about mailing ballots. Would you agree?
Oh, I would absolutely have concerns about it. I'm just saying that there are other communities across the United States that are trying to come up with ideas as to how we could try to increase voter turnout and make voting easier for individuals. Certainly, we do have absentee voting in Massachusetts where the Election Commission is able to send you a ballot, but there has to be very strict checks and balances around that. It's not a proposal that I'm making at this time. I'm just simply saying we need to sometimes look abroad throughout our country and see what are the innovative things that individuals are thinking about. How can we implement them here? And of course, we have to ensure that our elections are secure at every single level. So what we're proposing now is a small step. The idea is to make sure that there is equal information available to individuals. And I'll also say that for individuals who may have not come out and engaged before in a local election process, the opportunity to engage with the Election Commission, which is a neutral body, right? They have the opportunity to reach out after receiving that type of a mailing, ask any questions that they have. They know where they're going to be going to the polls at that point. It can sometimes be intimidating when they're dealing with a campaign that has an agenda for that particular candidate, and that's the campaign's job. But the Election Commission's job is simply to make sure that people have all the technical information that they need, and I think that's the key. Our Election Commission is currently working to be out in the community. They're going out to those community events, setting up tables, making themselves available, setting up some printed material that can inform people when they engage them. But sometimes you got to go to where the people are. Right. And I think that making sure that they have delivered to their home prior to the election a piece of information that can put them in contact with those people, I think would be very beneficial.
And what's the next step?
So the ordinance was passed by the City Council last week. The mayor vetoed the ordinance. He thinks that he would, in his veto message indicated he'd like to explore several other options. And certainly we're committed to working together with the mayor around those ideas. But I do believe that if we can accomplish a simple step in this cycle, that's going to be very important. And so automatically, whenever anything is vetoed by the mayor, it comes back before the City Council for a veto override. So that will appear in July, and I will be encouraging my colleagues to support the ordinance that they already supported one more time, because again, if we can't start somewhere, then I find it hard to believe that we'd continue the conversation. So our hope is that we can provide this information to voters. We hope it'll make an impact. Very important to recognize. There is no silver bullet that's going to shoot us from 9% turnout to 100% turnout. But we can take these small steps and hopefully continue to develop a way to get voters excited and make sure they have all the information that they need.